everybody. On behalf of Rock Creek Conservancy, I'm Jeannie Braha, the Executive Director. I'd like to welcome all of you to our March program as part of our Race, History, and Rock Creek series. These programs explore the intersection of those topics, and we are in for a special treat this evening. For our returning participants, you may recall last summer we did a fantastic program about the Summer in the Parks programs that took place in the Washington, D.C. National Parks. And if you're paying close attention, you would have heard a mention of Lou Stovall and the fantastic posters that were made to advertise many of those events. Since that time, we were thrilled to honor Lou for his commitment to civic engagement and his artistic interpretations of Rock Creek and many other things, as well as his building of community around Rock Creek at the Rock Creek Gala last fall. And I am just thrilled to welcome Lou, his son Will, who has just published a fantastic book about Lou's work of the land, and their friends, neighbors, but also journalists and historians, Kathy and Sam Smith, who are experts not just in all of Lou's dirty secrets, but also the history of Washington, D.C. that was unfolding as Lou was working on so much of his important art. And Washington, D.C., of course, being the context for our beloved Rock Creek Park. In just a moment, we are going to have our moderator, Jordana Rubenstein-Edberg, get us started. But before that, I would like to introduce Julia Washburn, the superintendent of Rock Creek Park.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. What a terrific turnout. I just want to say welcome. And just a few words. I want to thank, as ever, the Rock Creek Conservancy for helping us with the Race, History, and Rock Creek series that has been very successful over the course of the past year. And we're so thankful to have your partnership and to be doing this important work together. I also want to thank Lou Stovall for being here and being open to doing this with us tonight, as well as Will Stovall, Di Stovall, and Sam and Kathy Smith. So glad that all of you are able to join us tonight. Very excited about the content. I was asked to speak about a little bit about the parkland in Washington, D.C. very briefly. As you may know, Washington is the federal city and was treated as such, run by the federal government. And therefore, for much of its existence, the parks were considered federal. They were owned by the federal government and run as federal parks. And around the time when Washington, D.C. finally got home rule, many of the parklands were transferred over to the D.C. Department of Parks and Recreation, specifically those that really focused in on recreation, like the pools, community centers, and those sorts of things, as well as green spaces. However, Washington, D.C. being Washington, D.C., a lot of the parks have, as well as local significance, they also have national significance. And so those parks that were deemed nationally significant were turned over to the National Park Service, who'd been running them up until that point, and they continued on. So the parkland in Washington is a checkerboard, if you will. There are times when the city and Rock Creek Park don't know if this piece of land is that yours or is that ours? Oh, maybe we should take care of it together. So it can be very confusing. Rock Creek Park, Reservation 339, as we call it, of course, stayed within the National Park System and has some important nationally significant resources within it. For example, some of the Civil War defenses of Washington that our good friend Kim Elder manages now, as well as Battlefield, Fort Stevens Battlefield, and we have important historic landscapes. We have the last fraction of a plantation in the Pierce Mill plantation. And there are really important and deep, amazing stories to be told about Rock Creek and yet to be revealed stories. And we're really excited to be working on those. But I think it's really important to remember how much we need the arts, and that parks and arts, go together. People want to enjoy the beauty of the park, or the history of the park, and it's often explored through artists' representations of various things, and the needs of parks and the needs of the planet are very often best conveyed, right, through music or the visual arts, or just artistic expression in general. And the arts can make a statement for us that sometimes the parks can't make on their own. And Lou's work has been, of course, transformational in that for Rock Creek Park. And I'm really happy to see new generations as well be focusing their work on how to use arts to help people find their voices and to make sure we all know about the issues that we face together and have hope for finding solutions to them, which is why I'm very happy to have Jordana here today, who is a student at GW in the Corcoran Museum of Art, where she is studying social practice. And Lou's life, I think, your art and body of work and much of your life has been devoted to social practice. And so I think it's fun to have, several generations here today to talk about that and make sure that that important voice is heard in the future. So thank you all for being here. Really looking forward to it. And welcome to Rock Creek Park.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I'm glad we have Julia here and some other important members. My cat Ron is holding tight attention today as well. So I'm just gonna briefly introduce some of the panelists we have today. And I wanted to start with a quote from this book that's kind of a big part of today, Of the Land. Thank you so much, Will Stovall, Lou and Di's son, for creating this. I've been carrying it around for several weeks now, just letting it slowly seep into my mind. But this quote really stuck out to me as a great way to talk about Lou and everything we have tonight. So from Will. As a kid, I remember asking my dad whether he believed angels are real. He told me, yes. Shocked, I asked, really? And he said, yes, I believe there are people so good they have to be angels. This is how my dad must have felt while he was drawing and dreaming and writing words of kindness. He was alive and he was in love, and life for him was kindness. So in addition to being a world-renowned printmaker and artist, to have started and founded a printmaking company, Workshop Inc. In DC, to having had many kind of grand and great and incredible commissions, Lou is also about heart and soul and community making. And as a student of social practice, this is kind of just the most beautiful thing to be able to witness and learn from. We also have tonight Lou's son, Will, who is an artist and bookmaker in his own right, with a PhD from Yale University. We have Sam Smith and Kathy Smith. Sam, born in Washington, DC, is a journalist who has an incredibly just interesting history. I really recommend Sam. I'm excited to hear from you tonight as well. among many things, publishing his first book in 1974, Captive Capital, Colonial Life in Modern Washington, among several other works, and founding the DC Gazette. And Kathy Smith, a historian, and just like everyone who we have tonight, incredible visionary, past president of the Historical Society of Washington, DC, and publisher and author of book Washington at Home, an illustrated history of neighborhoods in the nation's capital. So excited to be amongst the greats tonight. But I'll get us started. So Lou, really kind of the star of tonight. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about how you got started with screen printing and visual work. Where did that come from, this instinct to create visual work?
Well, I got started as an artist without a whole lot of ideas about what I should do and how I should do it. But Rock Creek Park appealed to me because we have a wonderful park up in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is where I'm originally from. Well, maybe not originally because I was born in Georgia, but I was 4 years old and never actually went to a park in Athens, Georgia. But I loved Forest Park in Springfield. It just sort of ranged throughout the city, and you could approach it from almost any angle, almost the same as you can Rock Creek Park here in Washington. And it was a very, very special place. The wonderful thing about Rock Creek Park is going through it, you can almost always find families there cooking their evening meal, and that was kind of nice. And you could also stop and linger and have them invite you to, well, come and have a rib or something, and that was nice. And it's very much like Washington to have a totally welcoming place for all of us to meet at one point or another. And so I think that's the best part of this whole area is Rock Creek Park. And I know that Sam Smith, who is going to be part of this in a few minutes if I ever stop talking, I don't know if Sam has a fond memories beyond his front yard, which is, I call it a yard because in Maine is part of the property where Sam has originated. It's a wonderful scenic area and beautiful. There's so much in having to do with our lives and the parks that we'd all like to share. And there's so much, I don't know, I'm going to call it romance because we do love it. And it's hard to imagine a nicer place than this Rock Creek Park here in Washington. But I know that there's something like that similar. I mean, you only have to go for a brief meeting to Central Park in New York, and you find all those little vistas there. That little vistas is one huge section of the city, Central Park, and it's just a great place. So
Yes, I love hearing this vision of DC. I think often people don't know DC as this local community-based space. I think we are going to transition to some photographs and some archival images of your work and your studio in just a moment. And I invite Will and Kathy and Sam to join in bringing in some of the history and fun stories that you all have about these moments.
Well, good, Jordana.
All right, here we have Lou at work, commissioned to print works in his M Street studio in 1968. Can you believe that's you?
Well, I know it's me, but
Handsome fellow.
Handsome fellow, I'll say, among all the other things, and he's handsome. So here we all are at the S Street studio and doing some printmaking demonstrations for students. And I'd love to hear if any of you have any inside scoop on some of these student demonstrations. Was this a common thing? How did this come about?
oh,
I guess
might-
this one's unique for it was at Atlantic Pacific University.
Yeah,
So
that's
a
what it is.
traveling instruction. But from the very beginnings, there was student demonstrations, instructions, and printmaking from my parents collected stories, and then other people's stories from people who've collaborated with my dad. And one thing that was so cool, kind of between the S Street and the M Street, was a museum and workshop that will be the subject of an exhibit this summer at the Phillips Collection. And that was called the DuPont Center Workshop. And there was a mobile six unit silkscreen machine. That's kind of the best way to put it, so that 6 people could silkscreen at one time, 3 on each side. So it was very much a part of my dad's practice.
Well, my understanding is that anyone could come in and work. Is that right? I mean, it was a very open studio. And I don't know how many people Lou must have taught there. The other thing I remember about these posters that he created is that they were supposed to be affordable. And I said once, Lou, I thought you wouldn't sell anything for less than $15, but I think you said no, some of the early ones were $5. Am I right? Or free?
Oh, you're right.
So you were really building community there in that workshop and
Yeah.
making sure the art was accessible.
This reminds me of what you mentioned earlier today, Kathy, about there always being colored pencils in the house available for kids in the neighborhood. It really seems like that kind of value, as people, which also aligns with screen printing as a practice, as something that you can do over and over again, as something that you do together. Myself as a student of screen printing, it is very much something that's collaborative. You're with people when you do it, you work together. And so I love how that kind of art practice finds its way into your personal relationships and community action.
Right.
Well, that's right. It's very difficult to make silkscreen prints without having some people around to help, and whether they're there to help pull the squeegee or lay the finished prints on the drying rack. It's all an effort for the community to come and take part in. And because we were so crazily busy, anyone who came to visit would be invited to take part, to participate. And that was always a good part.
Yes, I'd love to hear, Will or Lou, if you could talk a little bit about this particular print and the story behind it.
Well, I can't see the whole print because it's a Gene Davis print that we're working on.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, it has a cool Rock Creek Park, or at least Fort Stevens, which is that Rock Creek Park?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's called Signal, the print, and it was commissioned by WTOP to inaugurate a television tower, so a television radio tower that's still there, and it's in Tinleytown, so just a block away from Fort Stephen.
Oh, this is a sweet photo.
Two handsome guys.
Look at those handsome fellows. I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but I am curious, since Lou and Sam, you both kind of collaborated in a lot of ways, both professionally and on a neighborhood and relationship level. How did the two of you meet? How did you first kind of connect with each other?
Well, it helped by the fact that he moved next door.
Oh, wait, I think just a little over to Kathy's side, Sam.
Okay, it was fairly easy because he moved next door and he didn't. I mean, I never knew when I was coming out of my front door whether I was going to have to talk to Lou or not. And before we get too much deeper in this, I want to mention Di, who's there on my left side, because she's quite an artist too. And among other things, she did a whole work about my life, which I love, which has about 16 little pieces to it.
Yeah, that's right. Lou Stovall is also a painter and studied at the Corcoran as well.
And right there, creating community alongside with Lou. So I took this picture on our back deck, and I love it because it shows Lou getting a present from the neighborhood. Those are neighbors, and he had a badminton court in his backyard. So the backyard wasn't that big, Lou, but almost the entire, what wasn't Di's garden was Lou's badminton court. And Di reminded me, that's Di next to Lou. I said, why is he getting a present on the 4th of July? And it was because of the tournament that he had in the backyard, in his badminton court on the 4th of July. And I guess he won.
And he was one of the things that people don't realize about Lou is that he really was a youth leader, among other things. He was a strong influence on a lot of kids, and he made it easier for them, for example, to play baseball without 9 players. And they had what they called coachmen. So if you got to first base, then there had to be a long discussion as to whether we made it to second or not. And Lou was often the arbitrator in that.
Ball went through the kitchen window once too, I'm afraid.
Oh, no. Yes, this is a particularly, I think, incredible historical and artistic piece of work that I know, Will, you have some special insight on.
Yeah, this one's so special to me. It was printed in the same studio as the first photo, so of my dad on M Street. And so that was a time of, so he graduated from Howard University in '66 and was printing at a commercial sign shop with projects, personal projects, activist projects that he did in the evening. And then it was in the spring of '68 that he moved into his first professional studio outfit, and around the same exact time as the Howard sit-ins, so student demonstrations that worked on the administration of Howard University, advocating for students' interests. And so there were leaders who were classmates and also recent graduates. And so it happened that in November, which was a conference kind of organizing into a weekend, some of the energy from the previous spring, that this was printed. And I wish I had on hand the list of names, because there were quite a few that are very well known. But it's a gorgeous print, and also a collaboration with Lloyd McNeil, who's a musician and artist and Howard University's first MFA graduate.
Wow, thank you for that insight. Lou, I'm wondering if there's anything you want to share about this. And I think in particular, what's striking to me about your work, about this piece particularly, but how you kind of find this really incredible balance between being a strong advocate and activist and part of movements, but also focusing on the art and the aesthetics and the true beauty of your work. How do you sort of balance being in, maybe an artist mode and also an activist mode? Does that ever feel difficult or challenging?
Well, it's hard to separate the various aspects of making creative art, because, for instance, the best idea for getting the community involved is to invite them to come in and help, and to just sort of name the day and sometimes the hour, and people would show up and help out. And so it was wonderful that that so many people from Howard University and also the community, which includes Sam Smith, Sam wanted to be as helpful as possible. and that's because Kathy said to Sam, you got to go and help those guys out because they're doing something important now. And what we were doing was trying to make posters that would facilitate the involvement of almost every city. Considered many cities here in Washington, in Washington. But the whole idea is that we had people coming from all over the country to work with us in terms of making those posters. And this, the one that's in the background here towards a Black university, had a national attention because so many people wanted to be part of it. And of course, we sold those for either $5 or $10. We started at $5 and then went to 10 when we saw that they were going to be snapped up. But it was it's just a wonderful involvement of making the art and knowing that people wanted it. And they wanted it mainly because it showed what was being done all over the country. And we were not the only city that was making posters saying towards a Black university, because we were toward everything that involved lots of people coming together, doing creative art, making speeches and so on. We had Stokely Carmichael, for instance, who came and had a lot to say about what we were doing and why we were doing it, and the fact that he was also part of it. And I can't, well, at this point, it's hard for me to remember all the people who were involved in making these posters, because I'm 85 years old now and can't remember much of anything, except I remember the faces, I remember the involvement, and I remember the excitement that happened for everyone. So,
Lou,
yes.
music is so much a part of this. And one of the things I remember about Lou is that often when these wonderful works were being created, there was music in the background. And it was sometimes opera, sometimes it was pop. Sometimes he was so excited about a new piece of music, he'd come over and say, you got to come over and hear this. There were always musicians in Lou's house.
Yeah.
We met some amazing musicians.
Yeah.
Emmylou Harris. Anyway,
Yeah.
Sam, you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say one of the problems with journalism is that
Oh, wait,
Well,
Sam, come over to Kathy's side. Kathy's
Oh.
got the magic speaker.
one of the things about journalism is it tends to ignore the non-political, and yet the cultural side of a place like Washington is so powerful, and it doesn't get the attention it deserves, because there's not only was not art but music, a long history of great music, and it affects the way some of the political stories are told. I mean, and there are things that people don't even pay attention to, like Howard University in the days of segregation graduated a lot of students who couldn't get jobs as teachers in white universities, and so ended up teaching in high schools in Washington. That changed the whole culture of the city. Those sort of things we don't pay enough attention to.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing. And I know there's some more to be discussed about this poster, but I just wanted to pull out one thread that I think you all discussed, which is this sort of seamless connection between activism and art, and that it's an ethic that's in your personal lives, which is, Lou, when you said it's hard to separate the two, the process and the product are one. So I appreciate that.
Jordana, there's another way in which Lou was building community, and that was a community of artists. And it was connected to activism because there were so many good causes in Washington at the time in the 60s and 70s. And Lou and I together would bring together artists to donate work on behalf of some good cause or some organization. And we would have a party and we would bid on the art. And
Right.
all of the money went to the cause. So Lou was building a community of artists as well in that way. Is that right, Lou?
That's exactly right.
No, I love that. The way that, this also has facilitated a legacy in your own family, but also kind of in all the spaces that you seem to be in.
Well,
yeah.
the author of this particular poster that's on the left there, I can only read a part of it.
Yes, excellence in education can be only achieved when a community values education as a precious goal and has the power and resources to manage its own schools.
Charles Cassell. That
Yeah.
says Charles Cassell.
Yep.
Well, we thought that it was important to involve young people also in the making of these images and the posters and so on, because we wanted young people to have a sense of ownership of what this community was all about. And this, of course, the schools were the most important part of that. And involving the students in the schools to come and help with the posters, take one or two home, let it end up on someone's wall where it would be seen, it was very, very important to have a whole community involved on every level. And for some reason, I'm thinking of John Walker, who was the dean at the cathedral, and what his involvement was to get young people involved. And years later, when some of his students decided to pull some pranks, and the news report did not give it a favorable review of what was going on and what they were doing. And John came and spoke and said that what we were doing was important and that it was part of the community. And so that was a wonderful thing. Yeah. Oh, here we have the poster of the Peace Corps, which happens to be my favorite poster that I've ever done.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. What
Yeah.
makes it your favorite one?
Well, can you show the whole thing? Because I can only see part of it.
Albert Schweitzer. Is it Albert Schweitzer?
I don't know if we can maybe zoom in on it.
Like the signature is Albert Schweitzer. Why do you like this so much, Lou?
It is beautiful. I am curious though, because it'd be hard for me to pick my favorite one.
Well, the reason, well, first of all, it's obvious that it's red, white, and blue. And that's part of that's the color scheme that we love in this particular country, because it says so much about who we are and what we're all about. And having the wording there by Albert Schweitzer, it was something that was important to all of us to have a connection with the image. Okay. Do you want to speak? Oh, well, Will disappeared.
Oh, I'm here.
He's
Oh,
still here. I see him.
oh, good. You want to speak to that, Will?
Yeah, well, yeah, I love the way you put it. One thing, it's maybe somewhat of a parallel thing to think about, but it's as these commission posters were being created, my dad and my mom and other artists that they worked with would make artist posters. So that has the unique aspect of not really advertising an event or being linked to an organization, but being almost personal statements. So they would be graphic images, silk screened with image and text, so words. And I just love that at a time of demonstration, of protest, of organizing, and of advocating, there was a practice of making posters for movements and organizations, but also for personal values. And so I think this poster is great to kind of coincide between both sides, where it on the one hand represents the Peace Corps, but on the other hand is this an individual quote and a beautiful statement that's kind of incorporated into it. And then, as my dad was describing, I love the red here being what carries the language. And my dad didn't mention green, but I don't think that should be forgotten either, the green background. But it's also, so Paul Reed, Washington Color School artist, so painter, who before he became a professor at the Corcoran was director of graphics at the Peace Corps. And the first numbered edition prints from the Lou Stovall workshop were for Paul Reed in 1969. So the first time prints were ever signed. That first person was Paul Reed and printed by Lou Stovall.
And I'll just,
As long as we got Will up here, I'd like to hear him just describe what he's doing, because it's just the Stovall influence is going down to another generation. And I'm embarrassed to say that I'm actually Will's godfather, which I don't deserve, because he graduated with a Phi Beta Kappa from Yale, and I graduated magna cum probation from Harvard.
okay, plug your grandson, love it. Very quickly, I will transition right back to you, Will, and for you to share about what you're up to, and also about where the Lou Stovall workshops are at. But I just want to read out the quote for anyone who might have a little trouble reading on the screen. The quote is, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know. The only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve." Albert Schweitzer. Feels appropriate for the Peace Corps and also for you, Lou. But back to Will, if you want to give we'll honor your godfather's wishes here. I wouldn't go against a godfather. To share a little bit about the Lou Stovall workshop, what's happening these days, how are you a part of it, and maybe begin to talk a little bit about this Of the Land book and your work on it.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Well, it's the main thing, I guess, is that it's been really exciting having this opportunity to work on my parents' legacy and with them at the same time, and have this great opportunity to talk with my godparents in the process. So this is amazing. And this summer, there will be an exhibit called Lou Stovall, the Museum Workshop at the Phillips Collection, and touching on all these things of community, creating a community, and community of artists, musicians, activists, journalists. And a kind of funny thing is the process of creating this exhibit is so much a intergenerational thing, and then I don't know how to put it, a cross institutional thing of kind of from one family to one museum, the Phillips. And it has the spiritual kind of link to DuPont Circle, where the first posters my dad did were handed out by hand, and where the workshop that he made this poster and worked from 69 to 73 was too. So that was at 1503 21st Street. And the show will collect prints and paintings, drawings, ephemeral things. So just the other day, my mom discovered this box that she had collected, and none of this would have happened without her kind of this archival spirit, because it was this box with, among other things, a matchbook from the Bohemian Caverns Jazz Club. So from I'd say circa 1968, or just at probably exactly 68, at the same time that they were making posters for musicians who came through, like Miles Davis or Wes Montgomery. So that will be on display. So things that, and almost everything has a story. So it'll be a show where you can see the work, read about them, and then look at the work again in a different way, and then hopefully be in conversation, because it'll be, I think, a really kind of I hope kind of my aspiration is to really kind of present make vivid or visual this sense of community and all the different people who came together. And then
Well,
the book of the land is a more personal kind of where all that went and kind of into my dad's later work.
Yeah, thank you for that, Will. Well, I will definitely be there. And I know certainly as an outsider reading and looking and listening, the storytelling works. I get chills up my spine hearing you all just talk about kind of these late night meetings and creation of these pieces. It's really I feel the legacy of it. As we take a look at this next piece, yes, God is an equal opportunity employer. It's a good name, you know. I'd love to hear, Lou, from you about the creation of this print, as you were among a group of 10 artists who were commissioned for this series. And you know, I'd also like to call in Sam and Kathy as well to chime in about your work as historians and journalists, kind of in collaboration with everything that was going on at the time, and how that was for you as well. So Lou, let's start with you. Share a little bit about this piece and this experience.
Well, this particular piece has the profile of an Indian, a native-born person who we identify as an Indian. And the reason for it is that I'm regretful to say that we didn't have a native-born person in our group, because I think for the most part, we just didn't have as much involvement as we should have. We had Black Americans, Mexican Americans, from people from all over the world here in Washington, with the exception of a native-born person that I could model his image or their image to show what was going on. So I went next door, because Sam Smith lived next door, and I said, Sam, I need a statement for this particular poster. And Sam left, and I left it with Sam overnight. And the next day, he said, God is an equal opportunity employer. And I thought, that's just perfect. You know, the reason that we always wanted to be close to journalists and so on is because we have ideas about that are visual, but we don't always have an idea that captures something that people can walk home with or write to their family about. And that's why Sam and Kathy were so important to our workshop.
Sam has a story about that, Lou.
Yeah, I said that gives me an excuse
Oh, wait,
to tell
over to
that.
Kathy's side. Yeah.
Yeah, it gives me an excuse to tell the story of the one piece of art which was in Lou's studio that I did, that for a number of years was there. And it was a drawing I did of a guy, and he's saying, art is what I say it is. And then next to him is a little dog, and the dog is saying, I know art, and he won't like that.
Good story.
Tell about Lou asking you for a quote.
Oh, yeah, the reason I came up with that quote is because I came home from work one day, and Lou says to me, I'm doing this art and I need a quote. And I said, writers don't give quotes. They don't write quotes. They write things and people quote them. But that didn't work, so I had to come up with one.
Well, I have, on a kind of similar note of art and activism and the collaboration between the two of you. Sam, I know kind of a big piece of your work as a journalist had to do with the Home Rule Act, which gives Congress the authority to block any laws passed by the DC council, I'd love to hear you share a little bit about your work around that and for DC statehood, and then maybe Lou, you can chime in as well.
Well, I think this is an opportunity to say something about that helps to explain why people like Lou did well in Washington. I've been noticing with all the ethnic conflict around the country, I've been having this feeling of why don't we hear more about Washington? You know, Washington was clearly different. Just as one small example, during the riots, J. Edgar Hoover called Mayor Walter Washington, our black mayor, to his office and told him that he should start shooting the rioters. And Walter Washington said, you can replace buildings, but you can't replace people. And when I think about it more generally, I think that the leaders, people who Lou and I both worked with, like Marion Barry and Julius Hobson, the civil rights leaders also got involved in issues like home rule and like DC statehood and like the fight against the freeways that involve both whites and blacks. And that's something that's not going on nationally these days, but was going very strong in Washington. And when we got home rule, when we finally got home rule, 4 of the initial members of the city council had been civil rights activists, black civil rights activists.
Yeah, you make a good point, Sam. It is the perception of DC is very fragmented, depending on where you're coming from. I want to take us to this next piece, actually. Yeah, this one. I love this poster, a poster for Summer in the Parks talent show at Meridian Hill Park or Malcolm X Park. Says contestants will be selected in neighborhood talent contests being held in various neighborhood parks. Any Washington resident who has a band or can sing, dance, play an instrument, or otherwise entertain is eligible. Lou, is there anything you'd like to share about this poster or these talent shows in the park?
Well, at this point of our poster making, we were doing the attractive images that people would want to take home and put on their walls or put in a public place or whatever. But the whole idea was to share the art, because the art carried the idea. And we didn't always have a good statement to go along with the idea that was pictured on the poster. And so it was important for us to have the involvement of the whole city. And that's one of the reasons that this poster existed, is because it was in fact a citywide conference. And we had the posters, we had the music playing in several churches, and especially St. Margaret's Church that used to be on Connecticut Avenue, which is still there, by the way. But the whole idea was to involve as much of the city as possible, because by that point we were in love with Washington, and we loved the way that it was going, and we loved the way that things were acted out. And if we go back to Walter Washington, who said, you can replace all the stuff that has been destroyed, but you can't replace the people. And Sam, of course, can quote it better than I just did. But it was important to have the citizens of Washington understand that was what was going on in Washington. And the reason that Walter Washington was such an important mayor for the city is that he also realized, and he also stayed close to us, throughout his life, because he loved Washington, he loved people, and we were all part of that good feeling about the community coming together and creating something.
this poster and this park in particular feels like a good moment to ask a question for all of you, but certainly Will, I think it would be good to hear your perspective here is, you know, with the changing and the gentrification of DC as a city, and especially around Meridian Hill or Malcolm X Park, a lot's changing in the art scene culturally, who can be here, who cannot be here. How do you feel kind of the art scene and the art scene that you knew, Lou, kind of in this community-based way, is where do you feel like it's at now? And Will, how do you see that operating from the art scene that you grew up in to the one that you're now involved in?
Well, unfortunately, I'm saying fortunately, we've had wonderful cooperation from the citizens of this city, and it's spread out through the country, so that not only do we have Washington people collecting our posters and prints, but it has gone to New York, California, some places in the South, and so on. And it's a wonderful thing to have all of this going on, but we also still need a language to go along with some of our artistic ideas. So consequently, because Sam and Kathy have moved north of us, and there's probably not much of a need anymore, except in certain pockets of Washington State. But we need ideas to go along with our ideas of that we're so vocal about, and that is, we make a statement, and there should be an idea that goes along with it, that sells that idea visually as well as journalistically.
Yeah, for sure. Will, do you have any thoughts on ways that kind of, you know, your community and peers in the art world, the art scene in DC, how it connects or doesn't connect with what you saw growing up?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to think about that or answer that question, but it's I'm thinking of it, I guess, now kind of in line with what I was describing of this upcoming exhibit with around the DuPont Center workshop. So so that's the 69 to 72 community museum, and I feel like there's really nothing like it right now. I think it's one of those things that just had there's so many things, so many lucky things kind of coming together for it. Its origin was DC's first contemporary art museum. So the building itself was a museum of contemporary art called the Washington Gallery of Modern Art that started in '61. And then this workshop, community workshop, started in '69 in the same space, but with a museum director, Walter Hopps, who was kind of just an incredible force for activation in Los Angeles. So what you have there is kind of an amazing talent, an already existing art scene, kind of moving from one generation to another. So that's the Washington Color School, starting around '54, and then maybe made concrete in '65 as a group, and then with Sam Gilliam moving to a different generation in '68, and then you have Howard University. So Jeff Donaldson, a Chicago member of Afro-Cobra, the great kind of a great avant-gardist movement coming to DC in '70. So all of this happening at the same time. And then Alma Thomas, still 2 years away from her or the exhibit at the Whitney Museum. So I don't know, it's hard. It just seems like that is a once in a, I don't know if it's lifetime or what it is, but I
Yeah.
don't expect something like that to take place in DC in my lifetime. So
Well, you're doing a good job facilitating it as best you can. And I from my experiences with the book for sure, and what I look forward to seeing at the Krieger, it's very poignant to see how you're carrying forth your own experiences while also kind of uplifting your own family and the community-based work. We are running up a little bit on our time to make sure that there's some time for audience questions. So we'll move a little bit quickly through these next few images, but let me know, Lou and Kathy and Sam and Will, if there's anything in particular that you want to make sure gets out there as we go through.
There was one that had a beautiful yellow in it that I want to talk about. Maybe
Yes.
it's coming up. Is it coming up still?
Yes.
Yes.
We are about to go to, and as I understand it, as well as being an incredible screen printer, it seems like drawing, Lou, is really at the heart of who you are and at the heart of how you work. And we're about to look at some of those and that yellow piece.
I talk about yellow.
Yes.
Oh, okay. The yellow is gone, but
No, it's coming up next, I think.
I think
it's the one, right?
No, well, that's all right. Well, there was yellow in all of there. That we could look into Lou's yard from our yard. And one day I saw Lou out there with a gentleman who seemed to be speaking French. And they were in this incredible discussion and waving their arms, and it looked a little, I just wondered what was going on. So later I said, Lou, what were you talking about? Who was that? What were you talking about? He said, yellow. I believe this was a man from Aubusson-Rogue in France. And Lou was doing some work for them. And they were having disagreement about yellow in 2 languages. Lou, is that right? Do you remember that?
Yeah, the problem is that I didn't speak French, and Madigo, the artist, didn't speak a whole lot of English, but we finally came to an agreement that a large swatch of yellow going across the middle of the image was really what we wanted to do. And we did, in fact, make that piece of art. But that idea of a large swatch of yellow going across didn't happen for a few years after, until we made the Corcoran poster. So it just shows that we were really at the tipping point of lots of ideas artistically, but we had to wait sometimes for the statement or the language to come by to explain it. Sometimes we had to wait for the right format of the art in order to picture what we were trying to do. And that's why I say it's important that we realize that we were a community of artists more than anything else.
And furthermore, I think something that
Wait, over to Kathy's side, Sam. A little more.
I've been reminded of watching these posters, is that the 60s was a time of what we call the counterculture. And that basically meant that you brought in art and music and other things into basically the political discussion. You couldn't produce political change without art and music. And it's something that we're lacking today. So that artists today, could learn something from Lou.
We need some new songs.
Yeah.
Yes, I also just love the idea of 2 people arguing about a color in a backyard. But it does remind me of something you said earlier, Lou, that I just jotted down. The art carries the idea. So when we discuss colors and placing, it really is important because it's about how it looks. It's about the message we're trying to send. Well, maybe let's make our way through some of those, these pieces. just so you get a sense of really the breadth of Lou's work. I'm kind of continually struck by, again, just this ability that you have to be in these really activist spaces, to be working alongside Sam and Kathy, working on policy changes, and also to have this kind of equal appreciation for art and nature and landscape and very meditative work. I find that your work is of the kind that I can really look at it. And I'm almost not surprised to hear about the influence of music that you mentioned, Kathy, because many of them do feel very musical, and something I can look at over and over again.
We were right on a ravine, to get back to Rock Creek Park for a minute. Right next to Lou's house is a ravine that went right into Rock Creek Park, and it went behind our house. So we had some of the wildlife of Rock Creek. We had an opossum hanging from the tree next door. At one point, the zoo was looking for black squirrels all over the world. And Di and I got in touch with the zoo and said, hey, come to Cleveland Park. We have a lot of black squirrels. Sam and I both, Sam walked to work through the park. I drove down Massachusetts Avenue and got into the park to drive to Central Washington all the time. And that parkway, I haven't had much chance to talk about history, but just a bit here, is that ride through Rock Creek was created not as a thoroughfare, but as a ride through nature in the 1920s, when people had cars they used for recreation. And those cars went right through the creeks. In some places, there were no bridges. You drove right through the water. That's not true now, but I think people in Washington still do get to drive to work through nature, and it's a gift.
Yeah, agreed. And feel free to hop in here, Lou and Will, especially in regards to Of the Land and its ode to Rock Creek Park. Lou, at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned how Rock Creek really functioned as this space where anybody could go and have a picnic or a barbecue, and you might find yourself strolling through and eating with someone new that you met. And that feels really special, just in general, but especially to have this book out now, reminding us that there are spaces like that, and that we have spaces in this city, as contentious as it may seem at times. I do want to open us up, because I know we have a couple of questions in the chat. Do we want to, I don't know if we want to keep, okay, we're all here, getting cozy. I think someone said in the chat, feels more cozy. I agree, see everyone at once. I think the first question that I saw was about the function of the M Street and S Street studios, what the function was, and if it was easy or hard to acquire space at the time.
Well, at that particular time, those were spaces that were available to us because we didn't have a lot of money ever. But we did have people who were willing to rent to us for what we could afford to pay. And so that was a wonderful thing about somehow Central Washington always made a place for us to work, to exist, and to be. So that's my shout out for Washington.
No, I love that. I feel like that's a huge discussion, among especially young artists today, is we need space. We need space to create. And we want a city that supports us and recognizes the value. I also saw a question, and I know we already had I think Kathy and Sam requested, so for any musicians who are here today, we need new songs. We're looking for new movement songs. But what encourages you today about today's artistic movements, maybe based in Washington, but maybe internationally? And I think that could be for Lou or Will or Kathy and Sam. What inspires you about current artistic movements?
Well, I would say that it's important for everyone to visit the various museums we probably have a dozen places to exhibit art nowadays that we didn't have back then. Back then meaning pre or post 1968, 69, but we have them now. And we have lots of wonderful galleries. The museums have been opened up. The Corcoran has gone, by the way, but we have students there working. But we do have the National Gallery, and we have a special museum, which is the Krieger Museum, which happens to have an exhibition of the pieces that I've made in the late 60s, early 70s, and throughout the 70s. So we have a cosmopolitan approach to art in Washington that we didn't have before.
There's something I might bring up because there's some people, guests here that were involved in this as well, but as an example of how history and art have come together, the Cultural Tourism Organization started something called the call boxes. Some of you may have seen Art on Call. There are call boxes all around town that involved local people who decided how they wanted to represent the history of their neighborhood and did some art in those call boxes. And it's still, I think the Humanities Commission is carrying that on. Started quite a while ago. And then there are trail signs all over town that you may have seen that were actually put together by members of the community with cultural tourism. Jane Levy's on here and has everything to do with that. Ace Everett is here. And I see Aggie Arbach from the Historical Society. So just to my 2 cents worth in his history, I think that history of Washington has helped to build community around those projects. And they have involved artists as well as people in the neighborhoods who got together to say, what is this place? What does it mean? And why do we care about it? And a lot of those neighborhoods are right on Rock Creek Park. And people have the advantage of using them. So thanks for letting me give that little plug.
No, I love it. Yes, Sam, sorry.
One thing I didn't know about Rock Creek Park until this.
Stay a little bit over.
One thing I didn't know about Rock Creek Park until this came up was that it's twice as large as Central Park. And Washington itself is one of the largest on a per capita or per acre basis cities, large cities with parkland. And it's something that we really should make more of.
Wow, I did not know that. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
I'm glad you said that, Sam, because I always think of Central Park as being at least half of New York City. But the truth is, Rock Creek Park is larger.
Yeah.
and has a lot more going on. But Central Park is still wonderful, and we're not taking anything away from that. We're just saying that,
We're bigger.
that Rock Creek Park is equal or beyond to Central Park.
Washington has a wonderful tradition of planning, starting with the Macmillan Commission and the mall. And the parks in the city now are all connected to that. And there are people here who can talk more about that than I. But Washington is blessed with Rock Creek Park and connecting parks. More greenery. We're a green city. We're a wonderful city.
Exactly. Yeah.
When we lived in Capitol Hill in the 60s, one of the things that we got doing as activists was to create something called the Emergency Recreation Council. And the purpose was to provide more recreational space for people. And it was interesting that in such an urban area, you had such strong interest in more grass.
We created tot lots in the triangles that the L'Enfant plan left.
We have a couple suggestions for posters coming up in the chat. So who knows what you'll all be up to soon. But I do want to just highlight the Of the Land book one more time and ask Will and possibly Lou. So this book, if you don't have it, you should really get it. I'm just enjoying making my way through it. But it's a collaboration of a variety of work from Lou and also of his poetry. And I've been really struck as a reader just by the really thoughtful placement of the poetry alongside some of the work. And Will, I'd love to hear, what was your process? How did you choose which of these poems? Was Lou, how was Lou a part of that? How did that happen?
Thank you. I also wanted to know, I wanted to edit what I said before about it was kind of a bummer about the future of DC, because in some ways I think there are exciting art movements already happening, and I'm thinking of especially Baltimore, DC cross currents, and thinking about the engagements around the Baltimore Museum of Art by a couple DC or Baltimore artists who have shown in DC. So Wickerham and Lomax is one group, and I think in some ways movements and new things can just happen like this overnight, and it's a network principle. I think that existed in the 60s that I was describing, that's also was around in these BMA, Baltimore Museum of Art engagements. So I'm saying I'm more optimistic, but
no, I completely understand. I'll turn it back to you, but I'll just add one comment that the program I'm in at what is still the Corcoran, though is now part of George Washington University. So we're still here in a new form, a social practice program. I'm watching myself as an artist work in policy classes, and it's a really new engagement, I think, for policy students to speak directly with artists and to create policy plans with us. So I do think there's a lot of hope as well.
I am very tempted. I see Kathy Freshly there, and I have to talk about the Meyer Foundation and how it supported the arts in Washington. So many things important to the city, but the arts among them. So, and Mara Cherkasky's there too, I'm sorry, but I see so many friends who, along with Lou and Sam, did a lot to build up the image of Washington, DC, because I think people who live away from here have very strange understanding of the city. They go to the mall and they don't see anything else. And they leave without knowing that we're a real city, a great American city with a culture of its own. That's what cultural tourism was doing, and that's what history's doing. But I think art and what Lou has done and Will's continuing to do is also helping to define this rich culture in Washington, DC, that too often is only seen as a political place. But it's rich in history and culture.
Yeah, for sure. A little bit back to Will on the organization of the Book of the Land, how you chose the poems that you chose, and how living, by Rock Creek Park kind of influenced the creation of this book.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was a book. There was Of the Land. So the series of the book existed as a kind of book, a pamphlet, because the prints were written along with poems at the same time. So each each print had a poem appended to it, or was worked out as a poem first. And but I think for me, it was seeing the prints on friends, neighbors, walls, different places, and fragments. So just one and then another, and not knowing for so long that they were part of a group. And then when I finally did kind of, so I guess, and I should say this was years and years of kind of putting together in my head what they were as a series and a group. And I think one kind of really precipitating moment was from a photograph that Sam Smith that you sent me of the living room of my parents' house with the drying racks, and just I couldn't believe that the living room where I was a kid was where my parents worked and so they made the prints of the series in the living room. And so for me, that was just such an amazing thing of what are these visions, what are these images of landscapes, where are they, and then learning that this was done in the first year of them living in the house, and kind of learning about the house as being so different than how I knew it, that there was bamboo, for instance, all around, and there wasn't the path, and learning that the path was one my mom built, and that the stones were from a creek at the bottom of the street that they had to dig up. So it was, I guess, this way of putting it together and kind of having this little, it was a small booklet as this kind of guiding thing of wanting to recreate it as a full book with all the stories and kind of putting it together.
The whole house was full of art, Lou, Will, when you were a baby. I mean, the living, that's what we remember, that all that work came out of the living room. And sometimes Lou and Di would be working late at night. There was a big round table up in their bedroom, and we'd go up and sit there, and they were always working. They were always thinking, planning. Do you remember, Lou?
I do.
The four of us up there. It was just a magic time.
It's hard to find Will.
Oh, no.
Too well to join us. But there was an Afghan, Ruby, a most wonderful white Afghan who was regal, right? She was regal dog.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
do you remember?
Yeah.
You moved in with Ruby. Sometimes we like Ruby better. Even.
Well,
Wow, I feel like I'm getting a good picture of your home, and I love hearing about just this interaction with the park and creating these paths. Before I kind of close us up, Lou, I just want to kind of give you a final opportunity today to share anything that you feel I've missed, or really anything about how being near Rock Creek Park and having that contact influenced you and your poetry and your visual work.
well, I'm glad you asked me that. I'd like to read a poem to you called Promise. Winter's light of heaven's might bears its promise true, of endless lands and silly sands and skies of lighter blue. Big old tree, that dreaming me, bared its branches too, from summer's end and autumn's trend, remembrances of you. Free birth here, no plan to fear, bare trees have their due, of leaves in spring, sweet offering, and love I have for you. And that little poem is dedicated to some wonderful trees that you can find in Rock Creek Park still today. And I don't know if you can see an image of it.
Yeah, I think if you hold it just up a little higher, we got like the top of the tree. There we go. Oh yeah, we have that in our slide. Yep.
You have that?
Yeah.
Good. So thank you all for being here and for letting us speak. I miss Sam and Kathy. I'm sorry that they have left Washington and are in Maine, but if they ever decide to come back, you'll all have to come and try to live on Newark Street.
Can we put a tent in your backyard, Lou? We miss you too.
You can, yeah.
Thank you for that beautiful reading. I just want to thank everyone who's attended this event today, and all the behind the scenes work that's been going on from Jeannie and Elena and Lindstrom, just to create this moment in time. Lou, for your endless work, same to Kathy and Sam and Will for continuing the legacy. It's truly an honor and an inspiration to learn from all of you. And to be here collaborating, just as it seems, just as you taught us, right? Collaborating in taking care of the nature around us, taking care of Rock Creek Park, and creating works of art to share it with people in the city and in the world. So thank you all so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jordana.
Thank you.
Yes. Jordana, on behalf of Rock Creek Conservancy and Rock Creek Park, I want to thank you for moderating this amazing discussion this evening. To all of our speakers, thank you for being here. So Rock Creek Conservancy is the friends group to Rock Creek Park, is all about helping people develop their sense of place with Rock Creek. And I think Lou's work and the book that Will edited, I think perhaps does that more elegantly than most of us. But we certainly hope that the rest of you will join us in that work and being stewards of the land that Lou so brilliantly depicted. And also, I think this program has just been a wonderful encapsulation and embodiment of the work that the Conservancy tries to do with Rock Creek, in part because we really see Rock Creek as a place not that divides people, but that brings people together and builds community. And I tell everyone the first time I met Lou and Di was at their home, and they were sitting on their front porch, and every dog that walked by with their person got a treat from Di's bag. And it is just clear that wherever they go, they bring people together around shared passions. So thank you for that inspiration. And also please thank Di for us. I know she wasn't able to join tonight because she was busy being in community with others who needed her. And we're grateful for her contributions as well. That sense of community permeated the chat. We will make sure to get a copy of all of the comments and share them with our panelists. You have a lot of friends with us this evening, a lot of people who were inspired and touched by your work, and whose friends and neighbors contributed to that. So thank you all. And thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our friends from the K. Fritz Foundation. And I think I see someone from the Meyer Foundation here who don't just fund the arts, but also the important environmental work that allows, as Kathy said, the history, the culture, and the nature of this fantastic city to continue to thrive. I hope that all of you will keep your eye on your inboxes tomorrow. We'll be sending a recording of this event, as well as some information about shows where you can see the Stovall's work, as well as the book that encapsulates it. And we'll also include reminders. We have fantastic programs coming up in April looking at the Black cemeteries that are found in Rock Creek Park and some of the challenges of managing those in a way that is respectful of all. And then in May, to celebrate May Day, we'll have a look at diversity in the environmental sector and how we can continue to improve that. So thank you all. Have a fantastic evening. And thank you so much to our panelists for being with us tonight. Maybe a round of applause for the Stovalls and the Smiths.
Yeah.
Richly deserved.
Bye, Lou.
Sorry.